One more step and your dog dies. That was the last thing Marcus Doyle ever said to her with any confidence in his voice. The fog hadn't lifted off Copper Lake yet, and the pines along the eastern shore were still dripping from the night's rain. Captain Vanessa Holt walked the lakeshore trail the way she walked everything else in her life, early, alone, and without needing anyone to tell her it was safe. At her side, off-leash but never more than 3 feet from her boot, moved Diesel's replacement, a Dutch shepherd named Ranger, 90 pounds of lean muscle the color of wet slate, with a notch missing from his left ear where shrapnel had taken a piece of him outside Mosul. To anyone passing on the trail, Vanessa was just a woman in her early 30s out for a morning walk before the lake town of Pine Hollow, Michigan, woke up. She wore an old olive-green windbreaker with no insignia, jeans and boots that had seen better decades. Nothing about her said anything. That was, as her instructors used to remind her, exactly the point. What the trail didn't advertise was that Vanessa Holt held the rank of captain in the United States Army, that she had spent 6 years rotating through assignments nobody wrote down on her official record, and that for the last 18 months she had been doing something the Army politely called administrative leave, and everyone who actually knew her called recovery. Ranger wasn't a pet. He was a retired multi-purpose canine, military working dog designation, 2 combat deployments. The same unit, the same convoy, the same blast that had ended both their careers on the same morning 18 months ago. They had matching scars. They had earned the right to walk a quiet trail together and not have anybody bother them about it. This morning, somebody bothered them. The trail bent around an outcrop of granite and opened onto a wider gravel lot where hunters sometimes parked their trucks during deer season. Today, 3 men leaned against a mud-streaked black pickup, drinking from a cooler that had clearly been open since well before sunrise. Vanessa clocked them from 40 yards out the way she clocked everything, without breaking stride and without looking like she was clocking anything at all. The one doing the talking was built like a refrigerator that lifted weights, a man named Marcus Doyle, local, with a record for poaching, and a worse one for things poaching charges don't usually cover. Flanking him were his cousin, Tate Doyle, rangy and twitchy, and a third man, heavyset, holding what looked like a tire iron loosely against his leg like he'd forgotten he was carrying it. Empty beer cans littered the gravel. A cooler in the truck bed had something in it that was not beer, something wrapped, something that smelled, even from this distance, faintly and unmistakably of blood that wasn't fresh. Vanessa didn't need to see inside the cooler to know what kind of morning this was about to become. She'd grown up around men like Doyle. She knew the posture, the way boredom curdled into cruelty by 9 in the morning when there was nothing else to do and someone weaker walked by. Ranger's body changed before hers did. His ears swiveled forward, locked. The low thrum that started in his chest wasn't a growl, not yet. It was something underneath a growl, something Vanessa had felt through her boots more than heard with her ears, a frequency reserved for things Ranger had decided independently were threats. "Morning," Doyle called out, pushing off the truck. "That's a hell of a dog you got there." "He's friendly if you leave him alone," Vanessa said, keeping her voice level, keeping her pace steady, 15 feet of distance and closing slowly, the gap she always kept without thinking about it anymore. "Just passing through. This is our spot," Doyle said. Behind him, Tate snickered, the kind of laugh that came from a man who'd already decided how the morning was going to go and was enjoying the anticipation. "Trail's closed for hunting today. State don't enforce that out here, but I do." "It's a public trail," Vanessa said. "I'll be 5 minutes." Doyle's eyes drifted off her face and down to Ranger, and something in his expression shifted from lazy menace into something more specific, more acquisitive. "That's a working dog, ain't he?" "I can tell by the way he's standing. Government dog, worth something, dogs like that. Got a buddy runs an outfit 2 counties over, pays good for trained muscle, no questions asked." The temperature of the conversation dropped without anyone raising their voice. "He's not for sale," Vanessa said, "and we're leaving now." "Didn't ask if he was for sale," Doyle said, and the smile came back ugly this time. "One more step, and your dog dies. We'll just take him off your hands. Tate, get the rope out the truck." Vanessa stopped walking, not out of fear. Out of arithmetic, she had buried 2 men from her platoon. She had carried Ranger 400 yards through a kill zone with a hole in her own shoulder because leaving him wasn't a decision her body was capable of making. She had spent 18 months in a too-quiet house teaching herself how to sleep again, and the one thing, the only thing, that had made any of it bearable was the dog standing next to her, breathing, alive, hers. Doyle had just threatened the only piece of her life that still made sense. "Ranger," she said quietly. "Sits." The dog dropped into a sit instantly, trembling with restrained intent, every muscle in his body a coiled spring waiting on a word. "Last warning," Vanessa said and stepped forward, putting her own body between the dog and the 3 men. "Get back in your truck." The heavy-set one with the tire iron didn't wait for permission. He swung first, a clumsy overhand arc meant to put her on the ground before she could think about it. Vanessa had been hit by men twice his size in places that didn't have names on a map. She stepped inside the swing instead of away from it, trapped his wrist against his own forearm, and drove the heel of her palm up into the soft cartilage under his jaw. He went down sideways into the gravel like his strings had been cut, the tire iron clattering somewhere into the ferns. Tate came next, faster than his cousin, with a folding knife already snapping open in his hand. Ranger lunged half a step forward on instinct, a sharp bark cracking the morning air. "Bleeb," Vanessa snapped, and Ranger held quivering jaw, working at empty air. Tate slashed wide and wild, the blade hissing past where Vanessa's face had been a half-second earlier. She let it pass, stepped to the outside of his arm, and put a short, vicious elbow into his floating ribs that folded him at the waist with an audible crack. A knee to the face finished it. He dropped the knife and didn't get back up. Doyle stood alone now, the bravado draining out of his face in real time, watching his cousin bleed into the gravel and his friend twitch 15 feet away. He looked at Vanessa, who wasn't even breathing hard, who hadn't raised her voice once, and something primal in him recognized far too late that he had picked a fight with the wrong kind of quiet. "You're he started, backing toward the truck. "I'm the person they send when this kind of thing happens to people who can't do what I just did," Vanessa said. She took a slow step toward him. "Hands where I can see them." Doyle's hand drifted toward his waistband instead, toward the unmistakable outline of a revolver tucked under his flannel. "Ranger. Fass." The command released the dog like a bowstring. Ranger covered the gap in under 2 seconds, hitting Doyle square in the chest and driving him backward into the open tailgate of the truck, jaws locking onto the forearm reaching for the gun before it ever cleared the holster. Doyle screamed, more from terror than pain, and the revolver fell uselessly into the truck bed. Vanessa walked over without hurrying, picked up the gun, checked the cylinder, and pocketed it. "I gave you a warning," she said, looking down at him pinned and sobbing in the dirt. "You don't get a third one." It was when she leaned over the tailgate to call Ranger off that she saw what was actually in the truck bed, beneath a stained canvas tarp that had slipped during the struggle. Not deer, not poaching gear, sealed metal transport cases, the kind issued to munitions depots, stenciled with faded yellow lettering. U.S. Army, property of Fort Custer Ordnance. Vanessa's pulse, which had stayed perfectly even through 3 armed men, finally spiked. These weren't poachers anymore. These were a delivery crew. "Ouse," she told Ranger, and he released Doyle's arm instantly, though he didn't move off him, standing guard with a low growl still rolling in his chest. She hauled Doyle up by his collar, ignoring his whimpering, and looked him dead in the eye. "You're not smart enough to steal from a federal depot. Who are you working for?" I don't know his name," Doyle stammered, blood and snot running down his face. "We just call him the quartermaster. He's got people coming." Right here. We're supposed to hand it off in. He checked the angle of the sun in pure animal panic. Maybe 10 minutes. How many? 2 trucks. 6, maybe 7 guys. They got real guns, Captain. I mean, lady. Please, they will kill all 3 of us if they find us like this. Vanessa already had her phone out, flex cuffs coming from a cargo pocket she'd worn out of habit for 18 months, without ever needing them until today. She zip-tied all 3 men efficiently, Doyle, Tate, and the unconscious one who was beginning to groan, and dragged them off the trail into a dense stand of cedar, out of sight of the gravel lot. If a team of armed men was about to roll up looking for their cargo and found 3 of their mules missing along with their merchandise compromised, Vanessa standing in the open would not survive the conversation. Ranger. Fuss. Heel. She moved fast and low back along the trail, scanning for high ground, and found it within 60 yards. A shelf of limestone overlooking the gravel lot, screened by hemlock branches, with a clean sightline down to Doyle's truck. They climbed it together, Ranger flattening into the wet leaf litter beside her, his slate-grey coat disappearing into the shadow almost completely. Vanessa checked the revolver. 5 rounds, nothing special. A civilian gun built for civilian problems. She had handled far worse with far less and made it home. She settled in and waited, her breathing slow, and even, the forest going quiet around her the way it always did right before something happened. At 7 minutes past the hour, 2 black extended cab pickups came grinding up the fire road, suspensions groaning under weight that had nothing to do with passengers. They stopped beside Doyle's abandoned truck. 6 men climbed out, not hunters, not local muscle. They wore plate carriers under unmarked tactical jackets, moved with the synchronized economy of men who had trained together for years and carried short-barreled rifles slung low and ready. The one in charge was older, broad through the shoulders, grey stubble cut close to a hard jaw. He scanned the gravel lot once, saw the blood, the dropped tire iron, the absence of the 3 men who were supposed to be there, and his posture changed instantly from relaxed to combat alert. He raised a closed fist. The other 5 fanned into a perimeter without a word being spoken. "We have a problem," he said into a throat mic, voice carrying just far enough for Vanessa to catch it from the ridge. "Cargo's unsecured. Find whoever did this. Weapons free." Vanessa looked down at Ranger, who was watching her face the way he always did before a job started, waiting for the only opinion that mattered to him. "Time to go to work," she whispered. The team leader, she'd learn later, his name was Holloway, a former Army Ranger turned freelance security contractor with a federal warrant nobody had managed to serve yet, sent 2 men sweeping the tree line to her left. They moved well, better than Doyle's crew by a mile, but they were trusting their optics over their instincts, and the dry October leaves betrayed every step they took. Vanessa slid off the back of the ledge, using the trunk of a hemlock to mask her movement, and tucked herself behind a fallen log, 15 feet off the path the 2 men were walking. She gave Ranger a silent hand signal, flank, low, wait, and watched him dissolve into the undergrowth without a sound, a trick that had saved her life more than once on the other side of the world. She picked up a stone the size of a fist and threw it 20 feet into a thicket to her right. Both men spun toward the noise, rifles tracking, exactly the half-second of inattention she needed. She came off the log low and fast, closing the distance to the nearer man before he could process that the noise had been a decoy. Her hand clamped over his mouth, her other arm driving a strike into the nerve cluster below his collarbone that dropped him boneless and silent into the leaves. His partner started to turn, and never finished the motion, because Ranger hit him from the shadow of a low pine branch with the silent, terrible efficiency of a dog who had done this exact thing in 3 different countries. Jaws on the wrist, holding the rifle, the man down and pinned and choking on his own scream before it fully formed 2 down. No noise that carried. Back at the trucks, Holloway checked his watch, then his radio. "Status," he said. "Static. Respond." Nothing. His jaw tightened, and Vanessa watched him do the math, watched him realize in real time that whatever had happened to Doyle's crew was now happening to his. "Form up!" he barked to his remaining three. "Hostile in the trees! Tighten on the cargo." They backed into a defensive cluster against the truck bed, rifles up, scanning the woods with the jerky tension of men who suddenly understood they were not the most dangerous thing in this forest anymore. Vanessa stepped out of the tree line into the grey morning light, hands open and empty at her sides, the picture of a woman with absolutely nothing to fear. "One," Holloway said, squinting at her through his optic, baffled. "Where's the rest of you?" "There isn't a rest of me," Vanessa said, her voice carrying flat and clear across the clearing. "Drop the weapons. Get on the ground. This ends without anyone else getting hurt." Holloway laughed, short and humorless, and brought his rifle up. "Take her." The whine of rotors had already started before his men could pull their triggers. Vanessa had called it in the second she'd seen the stenciled cases, not the local sheriff, but a federal task force out of Detroit. She still had a direct line, too, from her old life. A Black Hawk crested the ridge as 4 unmarked SUVs tore up the fire road behind it, and a dozen federal agents in raid gear poured out of the tree line on every side, weapons leveled, voices overlapping in commands to drop and kneel. Holloway looked at his men, looked at the helicopter, looked back at the lone woman standing in the clearing who hadn't moved an inch, and understood, far too late, exactly what kind of trap he had walked his crew into. He lowered his rifle. One by one, so did the rest of them. A federal agent in tactical gear jogged up to Vanessa as his team swarmed the clearing, securing weapons, zip-tying contractors, hauling Doyle and his cousins out of the cedar stand by their collars. He looked at the unconscious men, the blood in the gravel, the dog standing calm and steady at Vanessa's heel, and shook his head slowly. "Ma'am," he said, "you did all this." Alone, Vanessa reached into her windbreaker and produced a thin leather case, flipping it open to show him the credentials inside. He read them, went very quiet, and handed it back with considerably more respect than he'd offered 30 seconds earlier. "Just out walking my dog," Vanessa said, clipping Ranger's leash back onto his collar, more out of habit than necessity. "Trail should be clear now." She turned and walked back into the mist coming off Copper Lake, Ranger falling into step at her heel, the two of them disappearing into the trees the way they always did, two ghosts who had simply wanted a quiet morning and had been given, instead, one more reminder of exactly who they used to be.